Hi, this is Graham and thanks very much for joining me in part 2 of this introductory series to the Panasonic Lumix FZ200. In the first part we looked over the camera and looked at some of the features, but in this video I want to look at the Intelligent Auto and the Intelligent Auto Plus mode and examine some of the menu options you can change to get better photographs. So what is Intelligent Auto? Well, the Intelligent Auto mode is a facility the camera has to determine the correct exposure based on the scene type that you're photographing. So basically, when the camera focuses light from the scene onto the CMOS sensor, the processor examines the distribution of those densities to determine what sort of scene you're photographing. It can then compare those to its database of styles. So for example, if you're shooting a landscape which has green grass and blue sky, the camera can identify this and then adjust the parameters of the camera to give you a better picture. So it might increase the blue and green saturation to give the print more vibrance. You might be taking a close-up, so the camera will then put the subject in focus and blur the background. These are the intelligent scene modes, and there are 8 modes that the camera can apply. If it can't find a matching profile in the database, it just uses a standard algorithm to give you the best exposure it can under those circumstances. Sometimes the camera gets it wrong, and Panasonic clearly state in the manual that if you notice the icon isn't correct for the type of scene you're photographing, to go out of the Intelligent Auto mode and select the correct scene mode in the scene menus. With this camera now comes the Intelligent Auto Plus menu, which has given a bit of control back to the user to adjust things like the exposure value compensation. So for example, if the camera isn't getting the exposure correct, if you're shooting against light for example, you can correct manually to make the exposure correct. You've also got the facility to change the colour temperature. You might want to make the scene look more warm or cold depending on the type of scene. And you've also got facility to now adjust the background defocus. Basically it allows you to change the aperture of the camera to either a wide aperture or a step down aperture to give you more depth of field. We'll cover that later in this program. The Intelligent Auto mode is a good starting mode for anyone newly acquiring this camera or switching from another manufacturer's make to Panasonic to get used to the menu structure and the things you can change within those menus to improve your photography. It gives the new user confidence to go out with the camera and capture images with superb quality in 95% of all cases. And now with the Intelligent Auto Plus mode, where you can change some of the parameters, you can achieve even higher percentages of good prints first time around. So I advise you, if you are a new user, to try the Intelligent Auto Plus mode and become familiar with its operation before attempting to use some of the other advanced features in the other modes. So now let's look at the Intelligent Auto mode and the menu options you have to change. To engage the Intelligent Auto mode, we turn the top control dial until the IA symbol aligns with the line on the housing of the flash unit. This is indicated also by the rotation on the LCD screen. Once we're in the Intelligent Auto mode, the screen indicates this with the IA symbol. The IA mode depends on the camera recognising the scene type that you're taking. It may recognise a macro mode, in which case the icon will change from the IA symbol to the macro symbol, which is a flower. And then if you're taking a landscape, it may change to the landscape icon, or if you're photographing a scene with people in it and you've got face recognition on, it may show the face recognition symbol here. So it's an indication of what mode the camera selected in the Intelligent Auto mode. Panasonic do say in the Advanced User Guide that if you recognise the fact that the camera is not selecting the right mode, to go to the scene type on the control dial and select that manually, otherwise the camera may give you false exposures. To access the settings in the Intelligent Auto mode, as usual we press the menu set button to gain access to the menus. The first tab on the Intelligent Auto setup is a choice of Intelligent Auto or the Intelligent Auto Plus. And the Plus mode is the new mode for this camera, which allows some customizable features for the user. At the moment we'll just set up the options for Intelligent Auto. The next tab menu gives you the options for the still picture mode. On the right hand side, the first option is the actual picture format and the picture size. Scrolling across the right hand side gives us access to the menu to change them. We start at the bottom with a 1:1 format, so it's a square format, and the actual image size is 9 megapixel. The next one up is the 16:9 format, which is a widescreen format entirely devoted to HD TV. So if you're shooting images which are going to end up as HD TV images, 16:9 is your best option. The 9 megapixel gives you approximately 4 times digital gain, so if you wanted to crop into that image to give you the standard 1920 by 1080 mode, you have a 4 times digital zoom advantage. The next options are the 3:2 and the 4:3. These are ideal if you want to make prints from your images, and it depends on the actual paper size which one of these you'll choose. So if you're using a regular 4:6 print, then you'll choose a 3:2 as that's the correct aspect ratio. With the 4:3 image ratio, you have the choice of 12 megapixel, 5 megapixel or 0.3 megapixel. Obviously the higher the megapixel, the more image quality you will have. But if you're using the camera for producing web images, then you may only need to use the 0.3 meg size. As you scroll through the various options, the camera will tell you what the capacity of your memory card is for the number of pictures to be taken. So if I select 4:3 at 0.3 megabytes, the camera is telling me that I've got a space for 80,363 prints at that size. If I come down to the aspect ratio that I want to shoot in, which is 16:9, as most of my images appear on the web, then there is room for another 3,600 pictures on this card. To select the one you want, of course, just press the menu set button. The next option in the stills mode is the color mode, and we have the option of either a standard, which is the default for the camera, a more vibrant and colourful mode, which Panasonic call happy. The next one is the black and white mode, and you can see that the viewfinder now turns into the black and white colour mode, so you can see the effect that the camera will give you. And the next one down is the sepia mode, and again the display shows you the effect that you've selected on the screen. If you're selecting black and white or sepia, you will lose the access to autofocus tracking mode. So if I select standard and go back to the main menu, so you can see we have the autofocus tracking facility, and that's switched on by pressing the focus button on the side of the camera. We'll talk about autofocus tracking in a moment, but just to make you aware that if you're in the black and white mode or the sepia mode, you will not get access to this menu. So if I now went to the color mode and selected black and white and go back to the picture taking mode, you can see we've now lost the option for autofocus tracking. So that's just one menu item you must remember if you want to choose autofocus tracking. So we'll set it for happy mode, which gives a little bit more vibrance. The motion deblur control is just on or off. If you select motion deblur to be on, the camera will analyse the amount of subject motion that's going on in your picture, and it will attempt to try and freeze that motion by increasing the shutter speed. However, if the shutter speed can't be increased, it will increase the ISO to allow the shutter speed to rise accordingly. The only downside of having motion deblur set to on is the fact that you don't get any digital zoom in the intelligent auto mode. So if I turn motion deblur off and go back to the picture taking menu, you can see that I can extend the zoom up to 24 times, which is the optical zoom. Then if I continue on, I'm into 2 times digital zoom, which takes me to times 48. If I was to go into motion deblur and turn that on, the camera disables the digital zoom. So with motion deblur turned on, you can see that we can only use optical zoom and not the 2 times digital zoom. So again, just be aware that if you turn motion deblur on, you lose the extra digital zoom. The intelligent handheld night shot, again, is just on or off. If you select on, then the camera will recognize when you're taking a night scene if you are hand holding the camera. If you're doing a night scene on a tripod, the gyro sensors in the camera aren't generating an output signal, so the camera knows that you're on a tripod. However, if you're hand holding the camera, the gyro stabilizers will indeed generate a signal and the camera knows you're hand holding it. What the camera does then is to take a series of images and then combine them into one image. To make that one exposure, the camera may generate several exposures using a composite from each of those images to give you the best result. If you are using the Intelligent Handheld Night Shot mode and there is any subject movement, you will notice this in your picture as ghosting, as the camera can't resolve between the two frames. The next option is the Intelligent High Dynamic Range option, and again the menu item is just on or off. If you've got this set to on, the camera will analyse the amount of contrast in the subject, and that's the difference in brightness to shadows. If there is a lot of contrast in the subject, the camera can't resolve the whole image range. So what it then does is to try and compress the shadows and highlights so they will fit within the tone curve of the camera. If it can do that within the single shot, that's good. If it can't, what it'll do is produce another series of images and merge them together to give this effect. So it may use 2 images or 4 images or 6 images to compress the highlights and shadows. The downside of this is that you get a picture that may appear flat in tonality, and you may have to post-process that to get a little bit of contrast back, but it does allow you to capture the highlights with some detail in them and shadows with detail. The final option is the one for face recognition. It allows you to turn this on only if you've got some faces recognised in the face recognition setup. If you haven't done any face recognition, this menu won't turn on. So even if you just recognise one face by using the memory option, it will ask you to go through the process of registering a new face. So with the new face option, press the menu set button, and this gives you a guide on the screen where you must fill this with the selected target face. Once you press the shutter button, the camera will analyse the subject, and if it's passed as a face, will register that face with the camera. So once you have a face recognised, and here I've got one recognised, the camera will allow you to go into the face recognition mode. Otherwise it will stay off and you won't be able to turn it on. So with face recognition turned on, the priority in the scene will be faces, and if there are any faces, the camera will focus on those rather than the background. The next option is the motion picture menu, and you have the option to record in AVC HD. The AVC HD mode is fine if you want to show this image directly onto your TV from the camera using a HDMI lead, or editing in an edit suite to give you the best possible image resolution for video. In this menu also you have the choice between AVC HD or MPEG-4, and the MP4 format is useful if you've got a PC which struggles to edit AVC HD, or in fact if you're an Apple iMac user you can't directly edit AVC HD, you have to use a third-party program to be able to turn that into a Mac-friendly iMovie format. So in that case you would use the MP4 format. Once you've selected the recording mode, then you can set the recording quality. And the options in AVC HD are PSH, which is a full 50p progressive mode at Full HD 1920 by 1080, or the FSH mode, which again is Full HD but this time in an interlace format. Shooting interlace gives you more space on your memory card, however if there are any subject movements, these may appear as ghosting in the final image. So if you want to get the best quality recording, switch to PSH mode and you'll get some good motion picture. The other option is to use standard definition 720p at 60p or 50p depending on the region. So again you can get a 720 progressive at a high frame rate. If you were in AVC HD and selected the MP4 format, then the recording quality again is Full HD, which is 1920-1080, HD, which is a 720 format, and the old VGA 640 by 480 mode. So I'm going to set back to AVC HD and full 50p recording quality. The final menu is the Tools menu, and there's very little you can change in this menu, so we won't spend any time on it. There's only clock set, and that is about the only thing you might want to change in the menu. Unlike some cameras, this camera doesn't tell you when you should be using flash. So if you need to use flash, you need to do this manually by releasing the catch on the side of the flash unit to enable the flash. And you can see that the flash unit charged up because there isn't enough light in this situation to take this picture. If the camera can determine that you don't need flash, you won't see this icon turn red. Now if I press the shutter halfway down, you can see that the icon has turned red, which means that this picture will be taken using the flash setup. Remember, if you're using flash, to remove the lens hood, otherwise you will get the shading effect on the image, which you can see on the image here. So to take pictures using a wide angle setting with the camera, remember to remove the lens hood and now the picture's taken without any shading from the lens hood itself. Again, dependent on the actual scene type, the flash icon may change. Again, if you're taking pictures by flash and there are faces in the scene, the icon will change to the intelligent auto flash mode with red eye reduction. So it will actually fire a pre-flash to help to reduce red eyes in the picture. One of the new features in the FZ200 in the intelligent auto mode is background defocus, and that's enabled in the Intelligent Auto and the Intelligent Auto Plus mode. You can see at the bottom of the screen that this little icon is a face and a mountain, and both are sharp, so it's been determined by the auto setting. To enable this in a manual mode, we press the top control dial. We click it in, then it gives us an option to select a wide aperture, which is f2.8 with this lens, or a small aperture, which gives us greater depth of field, which is f8. So at the moment in auto mode, the camera is selecting a 2.8 aperture, and it will do that in all cases for the auto mode. If I want to increase the amount of depth of field, then obviously I can move this over to the f8 position. So I can either use the top control dial, and as I do so it moves the cursor over towards the right hand side. Alternatively, I can use the navigation buttons. So if I go over to the right hand side and press this set button, the camera is now set for f8. So it will now take the picture by adjusting the shutter speed and the ISO to give me an exposure based on an aperture of f8. With the camera set to f8, in this very low light situation, if I take this image, you can see that it's 1/2.5 seconds at ISO 400. So the camera has adjusted the shutter speed to 1/2.5 at ISO 400 to get the correct exposure. If I open the aperture to say f4.5, take the picture, it's 1/8 of a second at ISO 400. So the camera is limiting the ISO to ISO 400. So there's a hint that if you want the best quality images, never exceed ISO 400 when you're using the manual or semi-automatic modes. The design engineers knew that the image threshold for noise is ISO 400. And if I went down to f2.8, take the picture, it's 1/20 of a second at ISO 400. And if I increase the light, then the camera will first of all reduce the ISO to get the correct exposure. And you can see it's gone to 1/60th of a second at ISO 125. If we now look at the autofocus tracking mode, it's enabled by pressing the focus button as indicated by the yellow symbol here by the AF tracking option. If we press the focus button on the side of the camera, you'll notice we get a target in the center of the screen and the option to lock that target by pressing the autofocus auto exposure lock button, which is this one here. So once we've set the target onto our subject where we want to keep in focus, we press the lock button. So in this case I've set the subject to be the nose of the snowman, and I want that to be kept in focus if the subject moves. So having the target set within that area, I press the AFE lock button, and you can see now that this has changed to a target which is in yellow. So anything within that boundary will be kept in focus as the subject moves. So if I move the snowman, you should see that this target area moves with this area of the subject. And it will keep tracking while the subject's moving. So if you're taking still pictures, the camera will lock onto focus in that area. Even if I take the picture, the camera will come back and again lock on focus to the area you've selected, and will stay locked until you press the focus button to cancel it. Let's now look at the new mode introduced with this camera, the Intelligent Auto Plus mode. To access that, we of course go into the menu set and cursor over to the Intelligent Auto Plus option within the Intelligent Auto tab dialog, select the Intelligent Auto Plus and select using the menu set. You can now see the camera switch to an icon that says IA with a plus in the corner. You might also notice that at the bottom of the screen are two new icons, which is the exposure value compensation and the white balance control. The background defocus is still there from the previous menu. So with this new mode we have control of three functions: the background defocus or control of the aperture manually, the exposure value compensation, which allows us to adjust the camera if the exposure isn't correct. For example, if we were shooting a subject against the sky and it came out too dark, we can use the exposure compensation to make it correctly exposed. And the white balance control allows us to have a little bit of creativity if we wanted to add warmth or coolness to a picture. To access those controls, again we use the top control dial and press it in, and that gives us access to the three menus. If I wanted to use the white balance control, then I would cursor down to white balance. In the middle it's neutral, and if I move the cursor to the left hand side we add warmth to the picture, so it makes it slightly reddy yellow, and if I move it to the right it makes it cyany blue. So if I wanted to cool this picture down because it's a snow scene, I want to just bring the cursor over to the right hand side, and you can see that the LCD screen changes with respect to the amount of colour correction you're applying. So if I put the full blue correction onto the picture, press menu set and take the picture, the actual picture has the blue tone attached to it. If I wanted the picture to be warmer, then of course I will go over to the warm side, and again I can take the picture and you get the warm control. To quickly reset that back to 0, as that will stay locked now until you change it, you can either go back into the menu and press the trash can icon, which will bring it back to the central position, or if it was set in that position you can just move off the IA mode to any other mode and then come back to the IA mode and everything is cancelled out. That's particularly useful shortcut if you've got both white balance, exposure value compensation and the background defocus control all set. You would have to individually clear those down, but by using that shortcut method you clear them all down simultaneously. The exposure value compensation is useful if the camera doesn't get the exposure correct for the scene you're shooting. So for example, if you're shooting a snow scene and all the subject appears to be underexposed because the camera is being fooled by the amount of snow, then you need to dial in exposure value compensation plus. So this makes the scene brighter. You will get on the display an indication of just how much you're changing it. So by bringing the cursor over to the right hand side, it's increasing the amount of exposure. So you can judge how much you're applying, and when you've got it right, press the set button and you can take the picture and it will give you that exposure value compensation. An example of that is this clock face that I shot with the standard mode, and you can see that the clock is underexposed, and then I apply an exposure value compensation and you can see now the clock is perfectly exposed. And again, if I just wanted to reset this, I can go into the menu, press the trash can icon, or remember the shortcut, just step away from IA mode, go back into IA mode, and it clears everything down. I've changed the intensity of the lighting on this scene now, and you can see that the camera is determining that it needs to apply what's called backlight compensation to enable it to get a better picture. So that little icon says the camera will now employ backlight compensation. So if I take this picture you can see that it has now done a series of multiple exposures and combined them into one to give me one correct image. If I wanted to shoot video while I'm in the IA mode or the IA plus mode, then it's just a simple case of pressing the record button on the top of the camera, and the camera will take over full control of the video for you. It will adjust the ISO, the shutter speed and the aperture to give you the correct exposure depending on the scene type. So the camera will detect whether you're in a low light situation and switch to the low light mode, or if you're in a landscape mode, we'll switch to a landscape format and give you the correct exposure for that. Again, if you've got any exposure value compensation set, or you've got any white balance change, the camera will honour those in the video mode, but it will not allow you to use the background defocus, as the camera controls the aperture, not you in this instance. So for example, if I change the white balance control now and we went to a warmer picture, when I start the video recording, it will record that video using that adjustment to the white balance setting, so you can use that to augment your videos with a cool or a warm tone. And again, if you're shooting video and you found that your subject was too dark because you're shooting against the sun, you can apply exposure value compensation to brighten your picture and then start shooting your video. And again, it will apply that exposure value compensation to the video file. Well, that's it for this video. Hope you found that interesting. Thanks very much for viewing. And in the next video, we'll be looking at the first of the semi-automatic modes, the P mode, and what advantages you have shooting in the P mode, and what again are the menu options for you to adjust the parameters of the camera to give you better results. So until then, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in that video. Bye for now.